only language ever spoken in our family was English.
English.
Right, but my parents did talk Yiddish to each other, and they talked Yiddish to my grandparents. And my father had a store.
Yes.
And the people of the Jewish faith would come in the store, and then they would talk Yiddish to each other. But at home, it was always known that in America, you speak American. And even my grandparents only spoke English to us.
And how about in your house?
My house only English also.
Only English also?
Except my folks didn't want us to understand what they were talking about, then they spoke Yiddish. And when my grandmother lived with us, she spoke very little English, so they spoke Yiddish to her. My grandmother used to speak Yiddish to me, and I answered in English, and I don't understand any Yiddish now, currently.
It's gone.
It's gone. It left.
It left. All right. So where did you guys go to school?
I went to school in Virginia.
Was there more than one elementary school?
Oh, there were several of them. There was about half a dozen of them. I went to Horseman Elementary School, which was just demolished 3 weeks ago. I went up there. I did a double take. There was nothing but an empty lot there. And I went to Virginia Junior High School and Virginia High School, and also a year Virginia Junior College.
Which junior college did you go to?
Virginia Junior.
Virginia Junior College. And then what'd you do?
Then I went in the Army.
Oh, all right. Did you go on in college?
Yeah, I came back. I went to the University of Minnesota.
So you came back.
Graduated in 1949, December of 49.
And then did you ever go back to Virginia to live?
Yeah, I went, when I graduated from University of Minnesota, my dad talked me into taking a job on the Iron Range. I worked for the Hibbing Tribune for a year, and the job opened up for the Virginia Daily Enterprise at that time. And I worked a year there, and that's where I met Ione.
Oh, all right.
I was working in Virginia.
All right. Where did you go to school?
Well, I started grade school. It was at Lincoln School, which was just 2 blocks from our home, and on to Virginia, Roosevelt High School in Virginia, and from there graduated, went on to Virginia Junior College. It was a 2-year college, and I graduated from the junior college, but all I did was take business courses. My father said I should learn business, and I was a devoted son, and I listened to my father.
So what did you guys do about your Hebrew education?
Well, I think in Virginia, at the synagogue, we had a Sam Jaffe, who was he was the Cheder Hebrew teacher, and we just learned to read Hebrew enough to be able to become bar mitzvah, but it did not go beyond reading.
Mm-hmm.
There was very little Jewish or Hebrew education in Virginia.
And how was your bar mitzvah celebrated?
My bar mitzvah was celebrated. The family, all the Siegels and the Walts and the Ostrovs went fishing and caught fish. And for my bar mitzvah, they served gefilte fish and fried fish and all kinds of fish dishes. And I gave my Haftorah, and after the Haftorah, we went into the basement of the B'nai Abraham and celebrated my bar mitzvah.
All right.
And I think that was normal for most Jewish boys in Virginia.
Let's see. How'd Sam do?
I think it was pretty much redundant. It followed pretty much the same thing. He did have a few Bible stories that Sam Jaffe read and tried to explain to us, but that was about it.
What kind of guy was Sam Jaffe? I've heard his name a lot.
No, he conducted the services and also taught the children. He wasn't the most expert in the world, but he did his best.
Did you go to?
I would like to say something about
Go right ahead.
about Sam Jaffe. I know this story is true. My father had a store downtown, so we heard, or I heard, all the stories that were about most everybody. But Sam Jaffe was the so-called rabbi. He was the so-called rabbi of the Virginia Jewish population. So, and he was known in Virginia that he was the leader of the Jewish people in Virginia. And in one of the year, it was a Depression year, things were changing, and Mr. Jaffe worked for the city of Virginia in some position. I don't know which one, but somehow they gave him the position of garbage collector. And the Jewish leaders in Virginia got together and were embarrassed by his working as a garbage collector. And they raised enough money so that Mr. Jaffe got another position somewhere else. So he left that job.
Did you think that was a bit of anti-Semitism?
No, I don't believe so. I grew up, I was born and raised in Virginia, and I never felt any anti-Semitism.
I wondered about that. Did you, Sam?
I don't.
On occasion.
What kind, or how was it?
I was called a kike. I didn't even know what it meant at the time. And some of the kids, somehow or another, had anti-Semitic feelings. I felt that someone I was attempting to date as a young adult, there were certain girls that wouldn't go out with me. I'm sure that I was quite certain because of that. Their parents were putting pressure on them.
What'd you do for social activity?
Well, went to Gilbert.
Why Gilbert?
If you were big enough to get your hand on the bar, they'd sell you a drink there. And we did a lot of drinking, carousing.
Did you?
I don't know if you did or not.
I can tell you this, that when on my 16th birthday, I was sitting at the bar drinking a whiskey sour with a cigar. And I said to myself, I'm 16 years old, drinking and smoking a cigar. I will never forget this moment.
And you haven't either.
But we always heard the story that Gilbert at one time it was a small main street, like 2 blocks long, and there were, during the...
It was about 3 blocks long, or 4
maybe
blocks
3
long.
blocks long, it doesn't matter. But that there were like 30-some bars.
And houses of prostitution.
In Gilbert. It was a wide open city in years back.
That's
This
very
was before our time, where there was no longer any prostitution there at the time.
Right, but there were, bars were open.
The bars were still there.
And you could get a drink of whatever you wanted.
As Sam
And
said, if
the
you could
houses of
reach it.
prostitution had gone underground.
Oh, the prostitution had gone underground.
Yeah.
Yes. Did you have any Jewish
It
prostitutes?
went
I'm
undercover.
aware of.
No.
I didn't see any of them.
Only in the city. Do you get that? Look at that. Did you do social activities in the synagogue? I mean, were there mixers
the
or
kids,
yeah.
the children? Not really.
No.
No.
So what did the Jewish girls do? They must have.
They came to they went to the University of Minnesota or went sent out of town.
But how about when they were younger? You know, like high school and stuff.
I have 2 sisters, and they did go to, the girls did have a Sunday school training.
They did.
And there were stories told to them.
Mm-hmm.
But
And
they
did they have?
go on.
The Bible story, you mean?
Yeah, but I do
It was
recall
totally
that on
inadequate.
Sunday they did go to a Sunday school at the synagogue.
Did they have dances?
I
There weren't
don't-
enough Jewish boys and girls really to
To have a dance.
have a
No,
dance.
no, but
We should check the recorder.
In the time I grew up in Virginia, I understood that there were 200 families that were members of the Jewish community.
200 members. Do you think that's about right?
I think it was fewer than that. I think closer to 100, but I really don't know.
It may have been 200 people with counting children.
There were 400 at one time, but that might have been
that
earlier.
could be.
400 people?
Mhm.
Yes,
But that could have been earlier.
You're talking about the whole community, the whole
Whole
range?
Jewish
The
community.
whole
No,
range,
Jewish
yeah.
community in Virginia, I'm pretty sure.
If you counted the number of pews and so they couldn't fit 400 people in the
Oh,
synagogue.
I don't know if they all went to the synagogue. I
One
think
of the problems with the synagogue is that it was Orthodox.
Uh-huh.
And there was no conservative or reform congregations. And it was pretty difficult. If you went to the synagogue, everything was conducted in Hebrew. There was no English prayers given at all until later years when they did interject a few prayers in English. But it was difficult for a youngster who didn't understand a word of Hebrew to sit all day long on the high holidays and listen to prayers in Hebrew when you couldn't understand the meaning of them.
So what'd you do, hang out outside?
When hanging out, you got it exactly. That's what we did.
well, when it was built in, I believe, 1904,
Yeah.
I believe so. It was built by the Milovitz family.
Uh-huh.
And there was a balcony in the synagogue.
Mhm.
And
Separate the women
and the
from the men.
women, at the beginning, when it was first built, the women would have to go upstairs.
Mm-hmm.
In later years, when women sat in the back on the main floor.
Uh-huh.
The
A few
old-
sat upstairs. Some of the
the
real old ladies.
The older women still went upstairs. But my brother and I and my father always sat in the front row in front of the bema.
And so did we.
During the high holidays.
But you couldn't understand the Hebrew either.
Everything was conducted in Hebrew.
Did your family keep kosher?
Yes, we grew up in a very kosher home.
Mm-hmm.
And separate dishes, and for Passover, Pesach, the dishes were all wrapped up in paper and put into large shoe boxes, from the store. And my brother and I would have to take them in, and they would store the Pesach dishes in the basement.
It was a long trek, too.
Yeah.
And then we had a pantry during Passover that my father would nail the door to the pantry shut. So it was.
Oh my, oh my.
Yeah,
And did everyone always follow the rules?
pretty much so.
The kosher rules, they did.
I didn't ever taste bacon until I was 18 years old.
So they did pretty much follow the rules.
They followed the rules, but in later years, we did go out and have a tray of hamburgers.
Okay.
I don't think
Oh,
my
there's
mother.
the other trefa thing that would happen is that Fred Siegel used to butcher deer in his basement, actually, and he would snare a few of the choice cuts off of each one that he cut up, and we would have a big party, and he would cook them down the basement in his house, and we would eat them on paper plates,
That was
venison on paper plates.
It was an annual event
Yes.
from Fred Siegel.
So I had eaten tray foods,
Yeah.
but I don't recollect my folks ever eating out at a restaurant even. When I was a
No.
youngster.
Okay.
In later years they did.
Later years, yes.
Oh, well, did Bessie keep bacon in the basement?
No. Oh, wait a shake. When I was a youngster, I had, what was it? Rickets.
Rickets.
And the
Okay.
doctor supposedly prescribed the bacon. I don't know if, and so they used to cook it in the basement, and I'd eat it off a paper plate. I did have bacon. I was wrong. I didn't eat pork until I was 18 when I was in the Army. Yeah. I'm wrong. I forgot about that. I'm glad you reminded me.
Did you keep the?
Why did you hear about it? From From where?
Your wife.
Oh, okay.
Did you,
My mother must have told her.
did you, did you observe the Sabbath?
What do you mean?
Well, like, did everybody stay home and not turn on the lights?
My dad would work on the Sabbath, actually, on Saturday. He would work. In early years, I don't know what he did, but at least when much as I can remember, the store was open on Saturday. Except he would not. It would not be. It was open even on high holidays. However, he did not work. The help worked.
And how about for you?
You know, my father had the store open, and Saturday was the busiest day of the week.
Right.
So the Sabbath was not.
I delivered
not
groceries
observed.
when I was old enough to drive on Saturdays by myself. It was a big job, I tell you.
Did all the family get along, or was there lots of?
I don't remember a lot of friction.
I think that our families really got along well.
Except for Jane and his mother.
Well, but
That was later years.
in our youth, it was like one big family. There was a cottage at Squagama Lake, and there was a cottage at Vermilion Lake.
Both of them were my dad's.
And they were owned by our Uncle Carl, my grandfather's brother. And in the summer, we went out to the Squagama Lake, all the family. And I don't believe there was any arguments. Everybody got along. And I think they're still the same way today.
Did you go fishing when you went out there?
Lake Vermilion we did, certainly.
We went fishing, and our parents took us as children because the limit of fish was 8.
Mm-hmm.
And they took
There are
us,
a lot of limits for kids.
and they allowed the limit for children. So our parents really took us fishing, so that because they caught fish for eating, put on the table.
Mm-hmm.
You were meat fishermen.
And so the men took us out fishing, and I guess that's in our blood today.
You were the limit extenders.
Yeah, for a while,
That's right.
yes. And for a while, I was not that interested in fishing because as a youngster, 5, 6 years old, I was allowed to hold the rod and reel and to hook a fish, but never to retrieve it. One of the adults would reel it in. I don't know if you had that experience or not.
No, I was able to.
You were able to reel it in, but I wasn't able to reel it.
You couldn't reel it in?
So
Why
I was
is
too
that?
interested in going with them.
Yeah, well, what was important was to catch as many fish as we could, as our parents could, because the women would cook and make gefilte fish or whatever.
It was an important part of the diet,
That was right.
especially when kosher meat wasn't that readily available.
So, all right. And where, oh, well, of course you did. And then did you have friends who were not Jewish?
Certainly, both of us did.
Yes.
You did?
Yeah, our best friends were always.
Our Gentile kids, yeah. Both of them, yeah. I had no close Jewish friends at all, in fact.
No, I had friends right through high school. My best friend was Sanford Berman.
Yeah.
And we grew up together from kindergarten right through high school.
And he was with you this weekend?
Yeah, I saw him this weekend, and we talked over old times.
Yeah. How is he?
Sanford, he looks good, except I can tell you he's very heavy. He's diabetic, and his friend that's with him watches over him very closely. She watches his diet. In fact, there was an incident that happened. It was my 65th high school reunion, and Sanford was sitting there, and one of the classmates sat on his lap. And Sanford's friend was. I could see she was jealous. And she didn't like this girl sitting on his lap, even though he's 82 years old.
Right. Right. Did your parents belong to organizations of any kind?
Yeah, there was a Hadassah there, I think, wasn't there?
There was
A Jewish one, yeah.
a Hadassah, and there was a B'nai B'rith.
And my dad belonged to the Elks and to the Elks Lodge and the Veterans.
Yes, my father was a member of the Odd Fellows Lodge.
I think my dad was an odd fellow also.
Yes.
And what did those organizations do?
Played poker and drank.
No,
I
think
heard-
they did just, I believe there was charity work, but I think we grew up during the Depression years, and I think it was more important for the man of the house to make a livelihood.
I heard that there was wild poker games in the social hall of the synagogue.
I don't recall.
No,
In the house, at home, I remember.
I don't believe there were poker games in the synagogue. There
No?
were. My father was a poker player,
Mm-hmm.
and he played. He was constantly playing poker, and at Mike's Pool Hall. And I remember the phone number of Mike's Pool Hall was 24.
2-4.
24 was the entire phone number.
Well, he used to gamble also over at
Right.
the
Yeah, the operator would.
Chinese place.
Right. We had a telephone, and the operator would say, "Number, please," and I would say 24. And she would connect to Mike's Pool Hall, where there was usually a poker game in the back room, and they would call my father, and we'd tell him he is a customer in the store.
That's great.
And there were also family poker games.
Family poker games.
Yeah.
Okay.
At our house or
Right, but-
your house, I don't know.
Yeah, but like I bring back memories. About once a month, I recall at the synagogue, they would play a game called Schmear,
Oh, yes.
and it was a B'nai B'rith. I
Did
was
they gamble?
the secretary of B'nai B'rith. Now that I remember, but it was not gambling. We just played the game Schmear.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think there was any money exchanged.
Okay.
Well,
I wonder, how do they support the synagogue? They have dues? They must have had
Dues or
dues.
donations, yeah.
there were, I'm not sure, but I believe there were dues, but they raised money on the high holidays by an auction.
Auctioning off the,
And
Oh.
they would auction off the different prayers.
Oh.
And there was no writing at the high holidays, but they would auction and bid who would get the certain prayers that for.
Was it Aaliyah's?
Leah's.
Leah's, right.
Leah's, yeah.
And at certain times during the high holidays, and they would.
Forgot about that.
Yeah, and Sam Milovitz was the secretary, and he had the names of everybody, and he would take the name out and put a marker on how much was bid, like $3 or $5 or whatever, and then they would after the high holidays, people would
Collect. Yeah.
collect.
All right. So that worked.
Yeah, it worked.
But I remember he would be up on the, Sam Elvis would get it up on the bid line, they would name what prayer and how much am I bid for such and such an honor.
So when you think about living in Virginia, what do you think about?
It was.
Gold.
Cold, all right. Cold for
I
winter.
think there would be no better place to grow up
Yeah.
than in Virginia. We had, the school system had a great deal of money during the Depression. more
Actually,
than-
one of the best in the country.
They were the
Because of the
Oliver
mines.
Iron, the mining companies. I think it was the Oliver Iron Mining Company paid a head tax, like $50 for every man, woman, and child in the city, and so during the difficult years, the school system had money. The schools had
beautiful structures, beautiful.
Beautiful structures.
I paid
Swimming pools, Olympic-sized swimming pools.
all the books and were free. All the pencils and paper was free.
Lessons, musical lessons were free.
Your brother would not have been.
And we were lent any kind of instruments free, except the violin.
I know that, did they have like music lessons in the school and stuff like that?
Free music lessons to anybody that would like lessons.
I'm sure Sherman did that.
Yes.
And so he was a very fine clarinetist.
You were a clarinetist.
As I grew up, I played in the junior band, the senior band, the municipal band, of which we were paid 50 cents for every rehearsal and $2.50 for every concert. And we would get paid at the end of the year, and I would get a check. And Sherman, same, we'd each get a check for about $50-some at the end of the year. And we had a closet full of uniforms from the high school band and the college band and the drum and bugle corps. And so there were...
This isn't even plugged in. Is it?
Everything's plugged in.
No, look.
Oh.
I hope this is going
That
to.
is scissor.
It does?
Yep.
All right.
But anyway, we had a closet full of uniforms, and we traveled. I was a member of the American Sons of the American Legion Drum and Bugle Corps. We were state champions.
Wow.
At one time, marching drum and bugle corps, and we traveled to different cities. It was great. So your question was how was growing up in Virginia. It was, and I understood that they were one of the teachers were some of the highest paid teachers in the United States. So we had a great school system. I think Sam would agree.
How about you, Sam?
Yeah, well, I wasn't that far behind Rolland.
What do you think about when you think about Virginia?
That was a wonderful place to grow up in.
Yeah.
And both of our families were let's see, upper middle class families. We always had nice automobiles. They had city heat in Virginia, so we didn't have the pollution of coal and a lot of the other communities had.
They still have steam heat, city
Yeah.
steam heat.
Yeah, they still have. There was pollution to the extent that it all came out of one power plant, but it had a big high chimney in it. It was carried away. All the generated electricity and the steam that was waste steam was run through the streets to the various to every home in town and every business in town.
No one had a furnace in their home, and so basements were part of the home, and many basements were remodeled for living quarters because there was no. And I believe Virginia was one of the only, it possibly may have been the only city in the country that had municipal heat.
Oh, some of the other Iron Range cities had it too. I think Hibbing had it. I know Mountain Iron had it. If you look, the house. One thing it did mean is that the houses were very, very close together.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we didn't have anything in the way of side yards.
Yeah, right, and no one had a furnace.
Did you socialize with people, with other families from Hibbing and Chisholm and Bawabic and?
Not really.
No.
It's a strange thing. Eveleth is 4 miles away from Virginia. I knew very few people that lived in Eveleth and worked in Virginia, or vice versa. Did you?
I had one friend that we socialized with, Buddy Sagan. His father had a furniture store, and he during my teen years, he and I became very friends. His girlfriend was one of the Goodman girls from Virginia, and but I did socialize.
I did too. He was a friend of mine too. I
Right.
did some traveling with him.
Yes.
I see his name. I see his
I
name.
think, in fact, his Barb made a donation for the
Right. Yeah, he
cover
married-
the restoration of the synagogue.
Yeah, right. All right. And then when you left, Sam, you left in permanently
In 1951,
in 1951.
yeah, I came to work for Bruce Publishing Company in St. Paul.
Mm-hmm.
I worked there for 10 years, and then joined my cousin in a printing business, and we started Insti Prints in
Uh-huh.
1965.
Uh-huh.
I sold out my interest in 1970 and went into business for myself.
All right. And you left permanently when?
Well, in 1948, my aunt, my mother's sister, Aunt Marin's, I was visiting Detroit, Michigan, and my aunt fixed me up with a friend of hers from the far east side of Detroit, and it was too far for me to travel, so she made arrangements for me to meet at somebody else's house, another young girl's house near where she lived. And that girl happened to be my Ada Coblin, who I later married. So anyway, Ada Coblin, my present wife, fixed me up with one of her girlfriends for New Year's.
Uh-huh.
And we went to a fraternity party for New Year's, and all the kids there were Jewish, and there was drinking and dancing and an orchestra, and I met all these Jewish girls, which I never, every place I looked was a beautiful Jewish girl, and I thought, it must be like this every weekend. So
You misled.
Okay. And Ed and I, we became very close. We were attracted to each other. I moved back to Virginia, and I thought, boy, it must be wonderful to live in Detroit, where all these Jewish kids are living. So I moved to Detroit, where I had two sisters, and that would be in the summer of 1948.
Was that when you moved?
Yes.
Because I worked in Detroit in summer of 49.
Well, I got married in 1950, and I knew my wife for 2 years before we got
Maybe it was
married.
earlier, yeah.
Why were your sisters already
It
in
wasn't
Detroit?
49. I'm wrong. It was 1946. 1946 that I was in Detroit. I'm mistaken.
How did your sisters get to Detroit?
Well, my mother's sister lived in Detroit, and my sisters wanted to leave Virginia, and there was really, I believe everybody felt there was not much future to marry somebody Jewish if they stayed in Virginia.
That was probably true.
And that was a motivation was to marry a Jewish person.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, my two sisters both moved to Detroit and lived there, and both married there.
Mm-hmm.
And it was natural for me to move where my family was.
Mm-hmm. That's right. And what did you do?
When I first moved to Detroit, I worked for a men's clothing store because I had some experience in that. And then I got a position, or a job as a salesman in a furniture store. and I worked there for a few years, and later years I went into business with my brother-in-law.
Okay.
And we had registered the name Target. We had the name Target Furniture, Target Appliance, Target City, Target. We had all the names Target, but there wasn't a Target like there is today.
Did you have to sell them the name?
But the store was successful as Target Furniture.
Okay.
And we were together as partners, brother-in-laws, for about 20-some years.
All right. All right. So what was it like to go back for the, well, you've both been back to Virginia recently. Yeah. What was it like to go back?
Well, Virginia's changed. When I grew up, there were a population of around 12,000.
Mm-hmm.
And there was Bailey's lumber yard working, and the mines were working, and I was back here a few days ago, and
Nothing's working.
the population from when you drive into Virginia was said 9,200 people, and
That's optimistic.
Yeah, probably optimistic.
but I drove through Main Street, and I could not recognize anything like it was.
No movie theaters left. The movie theater, Mako Theater, which is the last one, is now a church. There was even a Mexican restaurant we had lunch at.
What was it like for you to go back?
Well, I had been back a few years ago. I used to go fishing in Canada every year and at least drove through it. Not necessarily through the main street, though. I drove down the main street, and of course it was totally different. Remember, it was pretty dead on the main street there. Now a shopping center in the suburb. So that had kind of cut into the business on the main street.
Does it seem like the town you grew up in?
It certainly isn't.
Doesn't seem like the town you grew up in. Did you drive by your old house?
Yes, and the school, which was just a half a block away, is gone, as I said before.
Yeah.
And that was kind of a shock. I got a little disoriented.
Is your house still there?
The houses, both houses were, I spent part of my life was still there.
Do you remember the addresses of your
Oh,
houses?
sure.
What are they?
Sure. 912 and 922.
What street?
Fifth Avenue.
Fifth Avenue. That's not too far from the synagogue, actually, is it?
No, nothing is too far. Right. Although I don't think that many Jewish people live in the far north side.
I don't believe that there's only just I think there's only a few Jewish people living in Virginia, though.
Yeah, there's 10, I think, or 10 or 12
Families?
people.
People. Oh, people.
There's two doctors.
Yeah.
They're both from New York.
Okay.
And then there's a couple that have been there a long time.
Intermarriages
They're in
there.
Evelyn,
In Evelyn.
the Siegels, but not.
And then there's
related.
a Siegel family, not related, in Evelyn.
S-E-G-A-L.
No, it's Siegel,
Oh, okay.
but not related. And
Furniture business area.
But I was there yesterday morning, driving through Virginia, and the city it looked clean,
mhm.
and it was very livable there.
What do you remember about this place?
You know, this should have been turned over because nothing was there.
This is my father, Ben Walt, when he first opened.
Turn it around so we can see it. Oh, is that? When he first opened the store?
This is my father's first store, and he was there for in that store for 50-some years. And
Is that not the one? That's the one on the main street. I recognize the floor.
yeah, this was at 335 Chestnut Street, and he rented that building for 50-some years.
You paid for it.
And he never did own it. And I was born above the store.
Uh-huh.
And I lived there for 19 years.
You lived in the front apartment. There were 2 apartments up there.
Correct.
Oh.
Yeah.
How old was your father in this picture, do you think?
He looked
I
about
would say
20,
he looked in the
really
early
20.
I would say early 30s.
I think so.
I would say early 30s. But I recognized the ceiling and the floor and the showcase.
Isn't that a fun picture?
Yes, but I don't remember. It was before my time. I don't recall him selling suitcases, but there's suitcases there too.
Okay.
Luggage, trunks.
Where are you in your birth order? Who was the oldest sibling?
Well, my sister Ruth was the first
Right.
born. My mother was 17 years old when she had Ruth, and Ruth was weighed a pound and a half when she was born.
Really?
She was a preemie, and my mother was not qualified, or my grandmother felt my mother was not qualified to take care of her. So my sister Ruth lived with my grandparents,
Mm-hmm.
and my sister Ruth was just 2 years younger than my grandmother's youngest son, John.
Oh.
So when we grew up, it was never Uncle John or Aunt Ann or Uncle Clarence. It was always John or Clarence or
Yeah.
Ann. So, but Ruth was the first, and then Helen was it was a year and a half later, and then there was Sherman, 4 years difference, and then I was a year and a half younger than Sherman.
Mhm.
So I was the youngest in the family.
Okay. Describe your parents to me. Just describe your parents to me, then Sam will do it. How are your grandparents? How would you describe your grandparents?
My grandparents were, that was Chaim and Paya. They loved us, but my grandparents never put their arms around us like we do with our grandchildren.
Mm-hmm.
And but we did see them often.
Mother.
You can go ahead.
All right, they loved us. Many times I went fishing with my grandfather.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if he wanted to take somebody fishing, I would go with my grandfather, and there was a close relationship, but there was never hugging or I love you or something. But we did get along. There was an affection there, but it was more just by not by touching. I'll put it
Do
that
you
way.
remember Paya's sourdough bread or what sourdough rye?
Oh, that's famous for that. Like a rock.
I don't really recall that.
I do though.
But when my mother was ill many times and was in the hospital, and then my brother and I would stay and sleep in my grandparents' home in Evelyn, and we enjoyed that because we slept in a feather bed,
Oh my.
and it was sort of a treat for us. We never had that. 'Cause I will tell you, we grew up. There was one bedroom above the store, and there was my 2 sisters slept in one bed, and my brother and I slept in the other bed, and there was now you have to understand, it was Depression years, and there was a curtain dividing us, so we didn't, so there was some privacy.
It was a shared bath, if I remember correctly. Was that one?
There was only one bath.
Did you have drinking water that ran into your house?
Oh, yes, we had
Yeah.
drinking.
But I mean, a shared bath was another apartment.
Yes, there was my father rented he leased the entire building, but for extra income, he rented 2 rooms in the back of the building.
And you shared the bathroom with the other apartment?
Yes, yeah.
Who lived there?
My father's tenants, you know, he helped pay the rent.
Yeah, whoever.
And there was one bathtub, and Saturday night, my brother and I would, now that I remember, we took a bath together, and my mother would wash us in the bathtub, a common, you might say a common bathtub. So
I think that was
difficult years, but we grew up.
Mhm.
We didn't know different. We were happy children.
How about you, Sam? You grew up. You lived in a
We lived
house?
in a tiny little house, yeah. And I shared a bed with my older brother when I was no longer an infant,
With Sheldon?
with Sheldon. And my grandmother was a tiny little house. My grandmother lived with us part of the year. She shared living with us with my mother's sister.
Mm-hmm.
Now, which grandmother was this?
My grandmother, my mother's side. And
So that was who?
that was what her name? English name is Fanny. What? Ione? Help me.
Yeah, that's Grandma who?
Fega Pomerantz.
Yeah. Pomerantz,
Okay.
Yeah. Oh no, Pomerantz was her maiden name. Her married name was
Oh,
Rothschild.
Rothschild.
Rothschild. That's your Rothschild grandmother.
Yeah, my grandfather died in 1926, and my grandmother shares. I say half the year she lived with us, and half the year in Minneapolis.
Mm-hmm. How many bedrooms in your house?
I don't recollect that particular house. From that house, though, we went to a home with 5 bedrooms. But
No.
my grandmother's already gone. Yeah. It was an old mining executive home on 2nd Street.
No. Did your family own the home?
He always owned his own homes.
Mm-hmm.
And my father immigrated to this country in 1912.
Mm-hmm.
He was 14 years old,
Mm-hmm.
and he worked with his brother in Eveleth, not Eveleth, excuse me, in Barbatic. My Uncle Joe, his
Mhm.
brother, lived there, and he worked with him and for him for a couple of years, and he had an opportunity to buy a store in Virginia, a little meat market and grocery store, and he bought that in 1916.
Mm-hmm.
He was 16 years old.
When he bought the store?
Yeah.
What did he use for money?
I don't know. Well, he was out. He used to go out in the country and bought tallow and hides, and bought cattle, and evidently with Joe's help, he was able to purchase the business,
Mm-hmm. And then,
and it was a successful business. He established a large restaurant and rooming house clientele, and at one time did probably the largest meat business in town. Did most of the restaurants in town,
wow.
and resorts business. Had 5 butchers working in a 15-foot front store.
Wow. So he did really well.
Yeah, did okay.
He was a fisherman.
He was a fisherman, but it was never pleasurable. All the guys used to drink a lot. It was a big 5-gallon can of beer and whiskey and pop. Went along with every trip. His dad would get boisterous, my dad would go to sleep. I tell him a story about a trip home in the 49 Plymouth that caught fire. I don't remember if you were driving or if your dad was driving.
I was driving.
Yeah. Forgot to take the brake off. At that time, the Chrysler Corporation cars had the brake on the drive shaft. And it caught fire.
While you were driving?
Yeah. You tell that.
Yeah. I was driving and I looked in the mirror and I saw that the grass on the side of the road was on fire. And
Stopped on the underside of
they
the car.
stopped on the side of the road and the car there were flames under the car. And I told my father, and my father got all excited.
We had wet
Sam's-
cunny sacks, which was the
Sam-
usual way of
Sam-
transporting
yeah,
fish.
And Sam's father was asleep.
We couldn't get him out of the car.
And my father couldn't get him out of the car. He had to drag him out of the car. But they did put the fire out eventually.
Well, you and I went out and put the fire out in the woods with
Yeah,
wet
yeah,
gunny sacks. And
They were angry at us for worrying about the woods.
because the only one guy could get under the car, put out the fire. And I think Ben got under the car with a wet gunny sack and put out the fire out.
They're worried about losing the car, I
Oh,
suppose.
sure. Yeah, well,
I have another story, not
you
another
didn't
kind
tell
of
that very
story.
well.
No, that was, but I.
The hell
but-
with the woods.
But I,
Get the
the part of the story was that Sam and I were worrying about the woods catching on fire. My father was worrying about getting the car on fire and getting Carl Siegel out of the back seat.
Our priorities were.
So that was our priority.
All right, you have another story.
Well, my mother's brothers, she had two brothers. She had three brothers, but the two brothers was Clarence and John, who were both doctors. And as a young boy, John got his doctorate from the University of Minnesota, and he worked for the Oliver Iron Mining Company. And he made house calls. And he had, I think it was a 1935 Plymouth, but when he went and made house calls, he stopped by and I was his company. And I would wait in his car while he went in and made the doctor's house call for the Oliver Iron Mining Company. And of course Sherman and I were young, and then Clarence was married, and he worked one of his jobs was working for in Ely, Minnesota,
CCC.
for the CCC camps, and that was the Civilian Conservation Corps. And he took his wife Rose with him, and he was the doctor for the CCC camps, and he brought my brother Sherman and I to visit with him. And so we stayed and ate with the officers of the CCC camp in Ely, Minnesota, for a week. And I remember that clearly. In later years, I remember Clarence had, I think he contacted TB, and he was worked at a TB sanatorium in western Minnesota.
Battle Lake.
Battle Lake, Minnesota. My grandfather needed company to go visit Clarence and Rose and the children, and who did he take? He would take me, and
Help drive.
and I would help him drive to Battle Lake, Minnesota. And I remember one time we caught just a mess of crappies.
I think my dad went.
And
In Battle Lake?
In Battle Lake, and we caught a lot of crappies. We had such a good time, and then on the way back we had them smoked,
Oh,
and that was quite a treat. And I stayed with Clarence and Rose and my grandfather. So my grandfather, we were close, and I think I was close with Clarence and Rose and
Yeah, he wasn't the world's greatest driver, however.
who? Who?
Yeah.
my grandfather. Yeah, I remember on the way back, the car was discharging all the way back to Virginia. We worried about
It wasn't charging, yeah.
Wasn't
Ran
charging.
back up better.
What kind of car did he drive?
I don't know.
Whatever piece of junk he could buy cheap.
I see.
I can remember, it was amazing, they used to call, they had a truck called Siegel's Airplane.
Well,
Had no windshield. Plenty of air.
Had no windshield. Oh my.
no, now that I recall, my grandfather owned a coupe with a huge back door, a trunk.
That was a Willys.
Oh, yes, it was.
Willys Aero.
That's right. It was a Willys, and they called it the Bee. It
Yeah,
was
Fred had
nicknamed
the same car.
The Bee.
Oh, he did.
Yeah,
The Bee.
The bee.
The Bee. They had a name for it.
well, it had a bustle on it. Kind of
Oh, I see.
huge trunk.
Very good.
Only sat two passengers, but the rest of it was trunk.
But you can see I was the company for my grandfather, company for Clarence and company
For John.
For John.
Right.
And so we grew up having, even though they were our uncles, we still called them first name.
You were with John when he lost the battery out of his Packard, weren't you?
Yeah, one time we were
Lost
fishing
the battery.
with, I was fishing up in Canada with Paul Ostrov and John and myself. And we were at, I forget the name of the lake. There's a huge lake.
Lake Jeanette.
It's a huge lake in northern Minnesota. It was getting dark out. We got in the car with all the fish and we started leaving, and everything went black, dark. The car died out and with no lights, and didn't know what happened. John had or Paul had a flashlight, and we found the battery was right near the lake.
The car had rusted through.
The car was rusted through.
The battery was in the trunk of those cars. It rusted
So
through.
somehow we put the battery in the back seat and connected wires, got the car started, and we got. But the main part, I was there. I mean, I was.
No,
a
the
young
battery
boy.
was originally under the seat in that car. I'm wrong. It was not in the trunk.
It was in the rear end.
Yeah.
But I was part of growing up with Paul Ostrov and John Siegel, and it was great growing up in that era.
So any more stories to tell, or should we end here?
There's plenty of stories, I'm sure. It could go on forever.
Okay, well, it's been within a minute or two of an hour,
Oh, all right.
so at least let's take a break.
Okay. Oh, you guys are great.